You aren't all new, but again, this is our Friday open Q&A. So you can come ask your questions if you have anything that you're curious about and wanting to learn about or want to share with us. Actually, uh, it's a good chance for that. Uh, we have a multi co-host situation. Our fearless leader Bill is unavailable today, and I'll try to do my best to partially fill the toes of his shoes, and we'll get you through here. Let's see. How's this? There we go. Should have had this up while I was talking about it. I'm not going to read the slides to you. If y'all know you don't read the slides to the and for following us, you should be able to grab a here. I hope this is the updated one with the link for the Slack because those expire after a certain amount of days. I believe Bill has updated this. So if you want to grab us here, and now the sign up for the email reminders here no longer will get you a reminder for each thing. But if you haven't signed up for reminders, you'll at least get that weekly one that you can then use to plan your session. Because we have a lot of other good sessions here um, in the military Trailblazer office hours besides just the best one, which is this one. We do have the other ones that are pretty cool too. There's some around coding, some around branding. Um, go out there and check us out. All right, everybody here knows all this, so oh, and there's my old beard. All right, let's stop the share for now. All right, I don't see any hands up yet, and I know this is a group of veterans here. Anyone
Small
got
group.
anything in particular they'd like to ask? Again, I'm wondering if we're seeing the effects of no reminder email. That's usually how I join the meeting, is I go to that reminder email. So I had to go find an older one to get in with. I'm going to need to bookmark it and make sure I
Well,
set myself a
I
good way in.
I have it as a standing meeting on my calendar with the Zoom link on it, so that way I always have it available.
Actually, I think I do. I just never use it. I always go to the email. Why is that? That's interesting.
I don't know because I get the reminder. I get to have the reminder set up for 10 minutes prior, so if I click on it, it'll then take me to the actual notice on
Oh,
my
maybe I'll
calendar.
do that. That way I don't have to search for emails. So, all right. So we don't have any good new wins. We don't have any new folks. Let's
I
check
have
the
something
chat.
new I learned.
What did
Yeah,
you
what
learn?
you got, Dan?
Well, I always struggle with bringing up new things I learn in groups like this because to me it seems novel, but I figure like for most people it isn't. But I'll give it a try anyway on this one. So I was doing a screen flow, and I like find new and creative ways to create screen flows whenever I can. And this was a situation where I was replacing their new button with a screen flow to avoid them having all the fields to see. Pretty common use case. But I was annoyed that when I got to the end of the screen flow, it wasn't really a slick way to get them back to where we started, or they had to click on a link or go somewhere else. But when screen flows end, I don't like the way it will automatically loop unless you have it do something else. So, meaning go back to the screen flow, they put the data in again, and then you're stuck forever. And that's exactly it, Ryan. I did the return URL, and for me that was like it just is a game changer because it's a
No.
really clean way to take people back to the record that they started with. And again, if anyone this call hasn't done that before, or you could show it for people who maybe watch the video, but Ryan, it's a pretty cool little add-on. Um, and for me, I'll just post that in the chat, how I did it. Also, you need to getting the record ID in there as well. For me, it was just really just understanding the language,
Mm-hmm.
and that, and in this case, the degree is the object that I was using, but that's the record ID. I could have left that generic as well, but thanks, Nick's done it too. But again, for me, this was novel and cool.
Oh, it,
Um,
it is. It's cool. And
and
I always have to go relook it up when I use it each time, even if it's just looking at an old version that I've used, just to.
yeah,
But
yeah,
so it's definitely worth exploring. If no one's got questions, it's probably worth pulling up and sharing and
yeah.
getting a walkthrough because I see this pop up as a fairly frequent question out there. So I forget it sometimes, and I've also seen that we've done some experimenting on some of the Slacks that I'm in where I think it's was designed for you can use it on both auto launched and screen flows depending on how you do it. If you set it up right, even though it's only advertised, I think one way. So it's definitely fun to play with.
Yeah, and on the other end of the ScreenFlow equation, um, there's a um, I forget what it's called, the Salesforce unofficial, I guess, unofficial Salesforce that people
Mhm.
have used, but you can also launch a ScreenFlow from a record, a change in the record as well. One of their in the past, I've always used ScreenFlow with a
Yeah,
button. I know that's a little clunky, but
I'm not a fan of the concept, but I like that people have figured out ways to do this. Yes,
yeah,
there's some unofficial SF components. You can do it through events, but I mean, what happens when, you know, seven people are looking at the record when the update's made? Do you want all seven to get the screen flow? Yes, there's ways to tie it down to individual people, but um, do I need to get that launch because someone else did a data load? There's just all kinds of I get a little bit squeegee around it, um, but yeah, it's cool that it can be done, and
yeah. I think if
that's
you're
a
talking
fun
about
one.
an enterprise, that wouldn't work. But if you're dealing with a smaller org where you're not going to have that many people on a record at that amount of time, I think it's a pretty valuable use case. I can share that link as well when I find it in a second.
Yeah,
When
I
I
was
can,
playing with that and the other day and came up with a couple other approaches. And one would be, especially for the small, you know, situation, what if you just embedded the screen flow and then conditionally showed it depending on um, the state of the record, and then in your screen flow, then when the record state changes, it would suddenly show. You would do
yeah,
your screen flow, and as part of the screen flow, return your trigger field back to unchecked or whatever, and then it goes away. So it's kind of the same thing, but it's very specific to just your screen without having to pull in all the extra tools because you can just do it with the built-in basic tools. Might
yeah.
not be quite as pretty, pop up in a modal, all that kind of stuff. But um, uh, when someone had a similar the question, hey, can you launch a screen flow? You certainly can, but I'm personally, as my personal opinion, hesitant. So I think there's some other approaches that'll do the same thing. But yeah, it's definitely worth sharing and exploring. It's super cool.
Can I also
So
just throw in a real quick comment about to Dan's point about, other people already knowing about something that you want to share? My comment is always this group tends to be people that are brand new all the way up to longtime experts. And so the idea of finding something that it's new to you, there's a good chance it's going to be new to somebody else as well. And I'm all about sharing that kind of stuff because we don't want to assume that everybody's on the same level at all. And we don't want to discourage anyone from asking
no.
questions because they think that the question is too simple or yeah, at all. Just
Mm-hmm.
this is all about sharing. So thank you for
Both great shares. Yeah, that are worth digging into later if we don't get more questions and other stuff and playing with. So thanks, Dan. I really appreciate that. All
Um,
right, Ken, I see you got your hand up.
yeah, I just sorry, I had to step away for 30 seconds, but I'm scarfing down lunch here, have my camera off, so just wanted to make sure I understood what I don't know, was it Dan or somebody was just talking about the use case? Was it you were talking about using like you were talking about using like a record ID and a schedule triggered or in a screen flow or what was the use? Just to summarize the use case, if you were going to dig into it, I just want to make sure I got that.
Sure. So the screen flow was initially launched from a new button, like a new record, create new, whatever. You can create a new opportunity, contact, whatever. In this case, I was using it on a related list as well. So when you use it on a related list, you need to pass the ID of whatever object you want in as well. But then when the screen flow was ending, I wanted to I wanted to just get back to the record I started on. And you can actually send the user anywhere, but in this case, I wanted to send the user back to where they started. And so that's where you just put in the return URL on the actual button URL. So you go to where the button itself is created on the object, and then you tag on a little return URL at the end of the button's URL.
Oh, right. Okay.
So
I didn't know if there was more to it than that. I saw the chat. I didn't know if there was more to it. Okay. Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks.
yeah, and the second example I was talking about is currently and most often screen flows are almost always screen flows are triggered by some sort of button, something that the user has to click on to generate a screen flow. In this case, I was trying to see, because we had a use case where we wanted the user to like something to pop up, hey, you need to also do this. Um, and what Ryan was saying is you could filter something into the record page itself, and that's certainly a case I've seen, but we wanted the user to have input. They wanted to a close lost reason, right? The close lost reason, one of the lost reasons was competitor, and we wanted them to, in that case, be forced to put in the competitor's name as well. So you can use a set of dependent pick lists if you want, but in this case, we wanted them to be able to type it in with the text. So because it needs to
As
be,
a dependency for them being able to click the button, or after they launched the screen flow, that it would be like a validation.
we wanted them to not have to launch the screen flow, but we wanted the screen flow to auto launch. And that's the uniqueness of the use case. And so that's where I did some digging, like, oh, there's some unofficial components that'll do this as well. So we'd
Wait, I'm
actually,
sorry. Auto launch a screen flow? You mean like on a record page load?
yep,
So it would literally pop right up into the screen flow.
right.
Interesting. Okay. And that was with unofficial SF, right? You can't do
Yeah,
that. Yeah. Okay.
not out
Interesting.
of the box. No.
Thanks.
Mhm.
Did you want to demo that, or I mean,
We didn't actually build that or use that as our solution. We did use out of the box for some of the reasons Ryan mentioned, but also just once I discovered that you could do some dependencies, we just decided that I would have a validation rule. It's not as pretty, but it would just force it on the page. There's a couple different ways you can close lost a record by going across on the path, clicking, go to the next stage and have it pop up then, or you can change it on the record itself. When you change it on the record itself, it looks fine, but when you use the path to go across, it's not quite as nice. But
yeah, there's
anyway,
also, I was going to say, there's also the unofficial SF. You probably know this, but the unofficial SF tool that for validations also in Flow, which I've used, which is really handy. So you can actually validate within the flow rather than it just throwing about like ugly validation error.
right, yeah. And then in the second example, they weren't in a flow at all. They're just um, a use case on the record itself.
Gotcha.
So do we have, I can go into the URL thing a little bit and show you what it looks like if we don't have other questions or anything else that anyone wants to get into. And then while it would be too much and I don't have everything installed here and don't want to have it installed to replicate one of the couple versions of doing auto launch screen flows, if there's still time and if anyone cares, I could kind of demo what I was telling Dan I would do instead of an auto launch screen flow. Totally up to y'all. I don't want to hijack this. I want to be able to take it in the direction y'all want to go.
I do have a question. If anybody knows, I always get concerned when there's solutions from unofficial SF. We're adding something else. We're adding another application, installed application. I wonder if there's any significant impact to um, memory usage, processing time, any of that stuff by adding on, a bunch of different installed applications like that. Anybody have any feedback on that? Any experience with that?
Most of the unofficial SF solutions I've used, I haven't noticed really a performance hit, but no, that's definitely a valid concern, and I would definitely say check them out. I've also been on a lot of government contracts where I can't always install unofficial SF. So, and they want to be a clicks not code, so I can't even like replicate it on my own, which is always a cool option with unofficial SF. You can replicate it on your own because the source is usually out there. Although what I like about unofficial SF when I have been on projects where I could use them um, is they tend to be pretty good community support. You can go out there to Flownatic Slack and some of the other things, and the people who built the components will answer your questions. So I have liked that. I do like them, but I've been more and more trying to not use them and to try to see what I can do native out of the box
Yeah.
because
I would I would chime in there also to say, like, so I just recently had, I always had that same concern. I come from a sysadmin background, like, and I like just do network administration. So it's always like, anytime you got to use a third party tool, it's always like, like, is this going to be future compatible? Is it going to break down the line? There's a lot of things. So I was always very hesitant also at first. Having had at least 3 or 4 Salesforce jobs, I don't think I've run into an org yet where it wasn't installed. That being said, you won't catch me working in government or any of those kind of jobs just for that reason, because it's I just try to avoid those kind of jobs. But legal things where they're super locked down like that, because man, I don't know how I would get by without those tools some days. That being said, I just did run it. I don't think the memory usage or anything would be any. I mean, I'm just thinking like from a sysadmin, like because they're basically just Apex. So I mean, it would be the same as any other Apex, right? Like you're writing code essentially. So each use case and each whatever unofficial pack you install, when it executes, obviously is going to take up memory based on what it's doing. I don't think there would be any other system performance things. You of course hit governor limits and things like that. That being said, I did just spend literally all Sunday, and I actually pinged Eric Smith on this because he hasn't updated the page in like 2 or 3 years. But like the Flow Actions base pack, we had 2.16 in our org. I installed version 3, the latest. I think it's 3.18, and it claims that they don't conflict and they should be happy dappy together. But guess what? No. So after hours of troubleshooting, I ended up uninstalling Flow Base Action Packs version 2, and the error I was getting was one of those obtuse, ridiculous, nonsensical. Basically, it was saying like the component. It came down to it was the batch. I was trying to do the bulk delete. It's got this long crazy name, bulk batch delete version 2. You can delete multiple flows, which again, I don't know how you would live without. It's ridiculously time intensive to do that manually, and our org is a lot of tech debt. So I wanted to get that running to clean up all these old inactive flows. Some of them are like 4 years old. I mean, it's ridiculous. They're still in our org. That being said, I had to go through and update all the prerequisite components for all the flows because it was all old, for all the unofficial SF stuff. And even after I did that, I was getting, unable. There's a hack. He has it documented on there where you have to edit one of the classes when you push to production for that particular flow or that particular, what do you call it, unofficial package or whatever. And even after I did that, I was getting an error saying cannot update component because it's already installed in another managed package or something like that. And after a while, I said, you know what? I'm just going to uninstall version 2 of the flow, even though he claims they work together. And sure enough, it worked. So, perfect example of like, yes, they can get in the way sometimes. And I'm always a big fan of if you use them, great. But like, I don't, anybody that says, I have multiple versions installed at the same time, maybe not. So that's my take on it.
It's it's
All right.
interesting from my perspective. I know that almost anybody that has an app store, like Apple or um, Google or whatever else, they have specific requirements about before you can post things. It has to go through security checks and a variety of other things. I was kind of surprised to find out that there's a rather substantial cost. And I don't know if it's the same for all of them, but I know for Resource Hero, it's a fairly substantial cost to have them evaluate that before you can put it on the App Exchange.
Yeah, that's a good point too. And I also had that same question. I mean, I don't want to, reveal too much, but I've worked at companies that were quote security companies who have less security than we are now. I mean, they're all SaaS companies, right? That I'm working for, but you know, and they weren't, I had that. Yeah, I said, hey, we're a security company. Should we be installing stuff that's not on the App Exchange? And at my company, it was okay. And I was like, all right, that's fine. The answer is, and a lot. I had that same question. I'm like, well, does it actually cost money or is it just time? Like they have to go through security checks, which is a good thing, right? You're working for a government or a security job. You want to know that the code has been vetted. Again, on the unofficial Salesforce White, I mean, basically the guys, Eric and the other guys say themselves, like, we don't take time to go through all this because it's a pain in the ass. I don't know if it costs money or if it's just that every time they do it, it takes a month to get through the security things, but certainly if you're in a government or one of those, security company or something where they're going to care about that, then again, I mean, there's so many apps that they just don't update on the App Exchange if you want the most current version, I guess for that reason. So it's hard to balance that sometimes.
Yep. No, and yeah, just as a, I don't quote me on this, and I hope I'm not getting anybody into any trouble, but Salesforce does a pretty good job from what I can tell about um, automating most of the security checks. So it really doesn't take a long time, which I know I worked with other companies that where they do take forever because they've just got a backlog of people that have to review it manually. But most of the stuff with Salesforce is done automated. And so, but the trick is it's like around $1,000 per time um, to have them run that stuff. So
Oh, so you did actually, I'm just curious, like, how did you find out, like, what it costs? Did you try to submit something or?
that Resource Hero, the company that I work for, that Bill founded and has writes the code for. Yep, every time we put a new version on the App Exchange, he's got to go through all of that and pay the money.
So there's the answer. It's money. It costs money. That's what I thought.
Yep, which is encouraging to a degree because I think that it says you're not going to do this if unless you're really invested and you really um, think you've got your app together, and then let them take a look at it in an automated way, but to be able to come back and say, no, you can't do this unless, and you can post exceptions. It comes back and says, you should be checking for user security on these particular objects. You can come back and with an exception and say, okay, that's fair, but not in this case because, and then they give them, you give the answer and they can approve it or not. But yeah, no, I like the fact that there's that level of, just making sure that that nothing's going to do damage to what other data that you've got, that type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for it. I guess just before we leave this topic, I'm just curious, was that like a flat cost they kind of told you, or is that just kind of based on like case by case? Like,
No, I believe it's a flat cost.
yeah, because I can't imagine. I mean, especially these guys that are putting out these tools for free, they're not going to spend $1,000 every time they do a minor update. I mean, that's crazy, right?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. And for what it's worth, I mean, is it Eric or there's Alex, Eric, and one other guy. One of them I think still works at Salesforce. I think is it Adam Edelstein or something. Like, I mean, for what it's worth, I mean, they're basically at Salesforce, just like putting out stuff under the radar, I guess. But the other guys I think work for other companies. So
All right, good stuff. Anyone have any other questions or anything you want to bring up before we go take a look at some of these things that Dan brought us? Sandy.
Um, so two different things I've been working on this week. And I'm not sure. So that whole the Zapier thing, has anybody actually like built things with that, like more complex, not just a simple trigger and action or anything to sync two apps together, specifically, something to Salesforce?
haven't, but tell us more about your use case.
Well, it's really more trying to understand Zapier and how to build stuff. Because the frustration I'm having is that they essentially have similar things like workflows and flows and stuff, but they're not quite as robust as Salesforce. So when you're trying to build something, you're like, oh, in Salesforce, I can do this entry criteria and all that kind of stuff, but you can't, it's like a little bit different. And I'm not even sure you can really do a full criteria because it's like, the record is updated. I'm like, yeah, but I only want it if it's updated a certain way.
So you're kind of limited by the filters they provide, like out of the box with triggers.
That's what I'm saying. Like, they don't really have that same sort of setup. So, I've seen that they have an additional, so it's like you can trigger it and then you can put it through a filter, but I don't want it to be triggered at all unless it meets the criteria. It's kind of what I'm trying to do. So the frustration part, of course, is the fact that it's similar enough to Salesforce that I wanted to do Salesforce things, but it's not Salesforce, it's its own thing. So it's like I got to figure out how to learn it. And so that's why I was just wondering if anybody actually had experience to pick a brain of, I guess. But it is a really, overall, other than the learning curve, it is an awesome tool. because at least for our use case, we're trying to replace something that is nice but expensive. And since we're a small company, I don't think we don't need something as robust as what we already have. The nice thing was the first 2 years we used it, we were on a partner contract, so it was free. And
So
now it's
do you mind if I ask what you're replacing? I mean, is it a public tool that you're using now, like a MuleSoft or something? Or
it's called Breadwinner. It's a great tool. I absolutely love it. They're a great company. They do some great integrations between Salesforce and I think they have integrations for NetSuite, Xero, QuickBooks, and I think there's another one. And so they do that integration with like the accounting software, and it's great. And some of the features that they have are awesome. Problem is, we don't need quite as much. And then the one thing that we do really like that we've been able to use with it, where it basically pushes the information, the specific information we want from Salesforce to our accounting software. Since we initially built it, they've changed it as considered an add-on feature. So now on top of, the subscription fee, we also would have to pay an additional fee to have this feature that we've been using for 2.5 years. And I don't know how to rebuild
they
it.
sold you a product and then tried to upsell you on more features that they added later.
But that wasn't the conversation. The conversation was we were a partner.
I'm not making fun of you. I hope
Right.
anyone here gets my humor. I mean, I just find it hysterical.
Well,
That's our whole industry, right? I mean,
right. Well, and the thing is what ended up when I had the conversation with them because we didn't lose the feature initially. It was like we lost it a couple months after we renewed the contract. And so when we had basically sent them the support ticket and I had the conversation with them, and then we tracked it down to the fact that it was this custom button, they're like, oh, we removed that from the main package because a lot of our feedback was that people didn't need it. And so they didn't want to pay for something they didn't need. So we figured if we took it out of the package, reduced the price, and then just added an add-on, that we would actually have more customers. So that's what they told me, which is, perfectly valid because most people, when they do invoicing, they tend to use um, the standard objects in Salesforce, which is included. The fact is we're using custom objects to create these invoices and send it. So that's why it's the add-on feature. The problem was because we had that partner contract and basically we had access to everything. They didn't know we had built a custom button, so they didn't know that they needed to consider that in our contract when we started paying it. So that it was like more of the fact that things changed. And then, of course, the other problem was that they never updated their online documentation. So the online documentation says it's included in this package. And then I'm like, well, I don't see a package that's called this. So what's going on?
to be clear, it was it managed, right? You don't have visibility into it. It's not
Exactly. Yep. So essentially, because of the fact that literally it's just syncing two apps and both those apps are available in Zapier, we're like, hey, let's see if we can do it. And so again, we've got a fairly small company, and then that program is based on the users, whether or not it's not based on licenses, it's based on actual users. So you get that charge based on how many users you have, whether or not they're having access to their features. So, depending on your point of view, that's either good or bad.
Yeah. So you're just asking if you're trying to avoid actually triggering it. Is that what you're trying to figure out? Like how to avoid the whole trigger itself?
I'm just trying to learn, really. So let me see if I have that.
I'll just say, let others chime in. But I mean, I don't have experience specifically. I mean,
Right.
I've peeked at it, but just from my like general knowledge of like how APIs work and
Right.
when you're going outside of the like anytime you're not even the ecosystem, but anytime you're going outside of like native Salesforce, like Sales Cloud or whatever, I'm guessing that you can't really do like a before trigger, like something like you could do native on the platform because first you've got to get the record, right? It's got to do that call out. Like it can't determine if the trigger even needs to be. I may be wrong on this, but I'm just thinking out loud. Like it can't determine whether or not to run the trigger until it first retrieves the data from Salesforce. If that makes sense.
Yes. However, I was able to actually, the Salesforce I was easier. It's from the accounting software. That's actually the harder part. Because in Salesforce, I can actually manipulate things. You can add fields, you can do sort of, because that's what they told me too. They're like, well, you can't really do a button. I go, I can do a button. All I have to do is add this. Basically, my button updates the record to make a certain thing true or not true, and that field is what's going to make the trigger. I'm like, it's really easy to do a trigger. I'm like, I can do a button. I just don't have that same ability on the accounting software. But it's kind of cool just as an example, because we don't necessarily need to walk through this for me to, when I'm trying to learn something, but I can at least show you kind of how cool Zapier is.
I'd love to see it if nobody else, has anything, because I need to learn more Zapier. So
Um, so the one cool thing that I've learned is that Zapier, so you are logging into Zapier specifically in order to create all these triggers and your connections. So they base it on how many users have an individual login into your Zapier account when they charge you for their fees. But let's see, which one was I? Let's just go back to this one. So you can see that this is like their workspace. They have this little canvas. When you're starting out, they actually have the Copilot, so you can try to put in something in order to have them help you figure out how to build it. So in this case, I was trying to like, if a contact is updated. So here's the trigger event, and here's all the different choices for this app specifically that they offer. And then you can configure it. And this one it won't give me that option of like anything specific because it's new or updated. And then the nice thing is you can actually test it here. So in this case, they find new records, and then I can actually view the details on it. So this is the record I want to test with. So I'll continue with that selected rest. And then I go to the next thing. And then this is again where you set it up. What app do I want it to go to? What is the action event? So this is one of those things that will now count as what they call a task and how many tasks you're allowed per month. And then these are all the different choices, the events. And then here you can configure it a little bit more.
so just a point of clarification. In other words, if you had one trigger, but you had like 3 update tasks, does that count as 3 zaps?
Yep.
Gotcha.
So they say that an action. So there's one where I have it do this, and then I have it find a record. So the find a record is also going to be considered a task. But they do also have you can paths. So you can actually add a path, so you can do something similar to a decision element, which is kind of cool. Looks like they got loops, webhooks, which I have no idea how to use yet. They do have, like I said, they do have a filter element. So there is some really cool things that it can do. It's just that there's a bit of that learning curve because you're used to Salesforce, and it's similar enough that you want it to do Salesforce things, but also different enough that you have to learn something different. So it's pretty neat.
So,
And I also like that if I say delete, they're like, really?
so what is the actual goal? I seem to have missed that. You want to replace this product completely?
Yeah.
And where is this product presented to the customer?
It's not.
This is used internally?
Yeah. So our use case was specifically that the owner wanted the accounting software to actually be a separate software than Salesforce. Just because you never know what happens. So it's like she wants to be able to have this record, have the access here and these records here. But when we're putting in our information, like our services and all the stuff that we're actually billing our clients for, we put it into Salesforce. So what she used to do was she would run a report, take the CSV file, like do those calculations within there, and then upload it back into Salesforce to update those records, then take her stuff and manually input it into Xero to create all the invoices and the invoice lines. So that was my first project, was to try to find a way to kind of make that job a little bit easier. So even if we decide not to do any sort of integration, we still already have a much faster method because we're having Salesforce calculate everything. So she at least will have the invoice line separately and, at least she doesn't have to do all the adding herself anymore. But
The APIs to be able to query the accounting software?
um so we actually did try something similar to that, but Zero must need a constant security token refresh because the one person that we have who is really good at that kind of stuff was like, that was the one thing he couldn't figure out. He would get it to talk, and then the next time he would try to do something, it was no longer valid, and he have to like refresh stuff, and he couldn't figure out how to do that rotating refresh. And then they decided also that this needs to be something that other people can possibly maintain too. And if he's the only one that knows how to do it, that's not going to be very helpful.
So have you worked with connected apps at all?
This is my first time, other than the breadwinner stuff, but that's pretty, under the hood sort of stuff.
In connected apps, you can authorize to self authenticate and renew your token.
Right. But
Yeah.
he has found a way to kind of have like he can get data from all sorts of places, but I think because it's, accounting software, it's probably a little bit more secure than other things that he's done it with. But it's fine. It's more this is my task that I was given is to figure out Zapier. So as anybody else had it, and I figured it's a good resource to share as well, that other people may be interested in knowing it's an option. And they do also have a free version too. It just means that your zaps are a lot simpler, so you can't have more than the what's the triggering event and then what's the action. So you can't have additional things in between if you're going to do the free version.
So there's no integration with Salesforce capability in the software to go direct?
No, I log into Zapier to create all this stuff, and then they have they have an integration. So you do that authentication through them. So if I say I want to connect to Salesforce, I click on their Salesforce app on Zapier, and then I use my login stuff to authenticate and give them permission.
Wait, I'm sorry. You're talking about in Zero, you click connect this
In Zapier. In Zapier, I have to click on the Salesforce app that they have and log in through there so that it gives the authorization for them to look at Salesforce, and then the same with their Zero app in order to connect.
Right.
Because they do have all these.
But I mean, like you definitely research, like you checked in the app exchange, check with Zero that they don't offer some add-on or something for, yeah.
Yeah, Zero actually says use Zapier.
Oh, right. Okay.
So if you, we have a similar tool that I've worked with that's, I forget the name of it, but it integrates with Salesforce by authenticating, and then your screens or your flows would be, they generate leads or contacts, whatever object you want to for your destination. And we would put a hidden field in there to put the source. So for lead source, we would say it came from blah, blah, blah as a hidden field.
Right. Yeah, I essentially did that to trigger it from the Salesforce side. And that's also, I can't do that in Zero specifically. So if I want something triggered from Zero to update information in Salesforce, I can't make any modifications in Zero.
You mean there's no like custom fields?
No.
Can you default a value into a field that's not used?
There are very few fields, and the only field that I've found that I probably will use in order to kind of create a match is there's an account number, and I figure if I put the Salesforce ID on the account number that I can match the contacts to the accounts in Salesforce. So that was my thought there. But yeah, no, there's not a lot of spare fields in Zero. So
Is there a field, I'm brainstorming with Greg, is there a field that you could check like like when it was updated on, like that would be the trigger. Like that field would only get updated when when zero. Does that make sense? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's I don't know. There is a lot of information about Zapier that I'm working on. However, to kind of wrap this up so we're not spending a lot of time with all these what ifs so that other people can do things or we can kind of go to that demo. Um, Overall, I'm in a learning, I am learning Zapier and I'm more than happy to share additional information as I learn it. Um, and ultimately it's really just it was the Zapier features itself that I'm kind of curious about learning because that will help me determine what I can or can't do in the other stuff. Um, but yeah, it's a great tool for those things. And then as I learn how things get triggered or don't get triggered, I think, and I'm more than happy. And it could just be the fact that I'm using the new or updated contact. If it's just updated, it probably is looking for something specific that I can filter it because I can do that in Salesforce. Um, but I haven't been playing with it that long. It's been about a week. So I don't have answers to all the questions, and I appreciate the help. So if we want to
All
move on
right.
to
Thanks, Sandy.
the return URL thing, that'd be kind of cool because I don't think I've ever done that. And
Yeah,
not even
I've got
the
a
return.
gotcha in there as well. So I'd like to see, Dan, if you guys are dealing with this gotcha and maybe how you dealt with it. If you want me to pop up the right URL and show folks how it works, and then it's a matter of it not refreshing after a screen flow redirect.
Huh.
Here,
Okay.
let's
Well, with my one day
let me share screen.
experience, I'm sure I'll be able to tackle any problem you
Oh,
throw at
okay.
me.
No, I didn't realize I was brand new to you.
Yeah.
Here, let's just share screen and show
No,
people
no,
what
it's
it
good.
is.
It's good.
Just to be clear, are we
Um,
trying not to use unofficial tools, or we are using
We're
unofficial?
not using unofficial tools.
we're
So I was just
using
gonna say,
nothing.
there's one. I think there's an unofficial tool for that too, like force a screen refresh on return.
Just right now, we're not.
Yeah.
Not
There are those tools, yes. But if you're using just the standard ret URL to return from a say a flow that you've launched, you can tell there's an experimental record. It's a little chaos in here. Um, I come in here when people have problems and I want to give them an answer. I come in here and I bang it out here and then go, yeah, this works or this doesn't work, and here's what you should do. So the concept behind the ret URL, what are we even talking about? That's these buttons up here, and when they're done, what do you do? How do you return from them? Is the question. I don't think I have a button up here that doesn't return from anything. Oh, maybe. Let's see what this does. All right. So whenever we're done here, see, it just reloads. So this is what Dan was talking about. If you use a button to launch a screen flow, you do whatever you're going to do here. Next, it does its stuff, and then it reloads you back to the screen. So nobody wants that. So let's get back to our record. So this here will redirect us from the screen flow when we're done, but let's take a step backwards and look at what that is. You're going to go to your buttons, links, and actions, and when you build your button, link, or action, you're going to come in here. Here's my redirect from screen flow button. And you're going to use the URL that you would use to pass in the ID so that the flow could work from it. But you're also going to put this, and that might be hard to read, this ampersand ret URL. And it's a relative URL that it's returning to. So really it just needs the ID of the record. So all that means is when the flow is done, it's going to then go there. So that's what the ret URL does. So it's super easy to set up if you get the format and look at the links that were posted earlier. If you want to get an example of some blogs where people have done this and kind of outlined it. I usually go back and I find one of my old ones and I relook at my format and then I just rebuild from there. But when you're first trying to do it, find one of those blogs. It'll be very helpful. But it's just as simple as you're launching the flow. And if you're trying to figure out the address for your flow, let's just, because I don't know how advanced anyone here is. So you would go to say let's get back to normal size. you go to your list of flows here and you find the flow you want to launch and come here to view details and versions, and it'll give you the URL to your flow. So when you're making that button to launch, you could just put this. And that's essentially what the one that I showed you that it goes back and repeats. That's what happens. And that's your standard. I mean, plus you pass in the ID if you want to be able to do stuff with it. But so the ID, and then when you look at my my one with the return URL, so that's this redirect from ScreenFlow button. Now I launch that same flow. Give it some text here in my sum text field. Hit next, and then it redirected us back to the record. But you'll notice this is my sum text field. Hey, it did it. The thing I said it doesn't do, it did. It refreshed. It says hi there. But let's do it once more just for good
Glad I
measure.
can help, Brian. I will say it might be useful to show people who've never done this at all, that starting with a specific URL and then paring it down to the minimum amount that you need, because that's something that I did. I actually took the whole page URL at first, of the page I wanted to, and then I made which is specific, and then I made it general, and then I shortened it to as much as I could. So those are the steps in the process when you're doing this the very first time. You can take an entire page URL and put it in that space, and that'll take you to a specific page. And then if you want to make it general, then you've got lots of shortcuts from there. But
Which will also
you'll
help
definitely want to shorten that. Sorry,
I was just
you'll
gonna say,
definitely.
from a sandbox, that'll help you too, because you won't have you'll just have the relative path, so you don't have to worry about changing it from sandbox to production or dev work or whatever.
that's right. That was my thought process exactly, Ken. That's why I thought, okay, if this is very specific, then it's environmental specific as well, and that's not going to work as we move it across different, from sandbox to production.
Exactly. So that's all I was going to say. So then the other aspect here, this is the same thing, but it's testing an auto launch flow, because I've always seen this used for screen flows, but it turns out you can do it with an auto launch flow as well. So if you ever have an auto launch flow, you can put the ret URL. It'll do its thing in the background without a screen and then dump you back here. Just showing you that. But okay, so the gotcha isn't a gotcha. It must have been something on my end when I was playing with it while we were talking earlier. So I'm really glad to hear that. It's refreshing. I liked it. That is very refreshing that it refreshed. And
Actually, just a side note on that, Ryan, could it possibly be the lovely feature of Lightning where you have to disable that cache setting, that if it's not, you just refresh like 10 times before? That's why you thought it wasn't working. You know what I'm talking about?
perhaps. So
Can we share that setting for everyone's benefit?
that's a setting that I don't, except for in development, use, because in reality, I want my customers who aren't making behind the scenes changes to be able to use it, and I don't think it's what did this. So, I mean, yeah, you can demo that if you like, but I'd
So the others know what I'm talking about. Like, you hit refresh and why is it not updating? Oh, because Lightning cache is not refreshing.
Well, but the easy way to also force it is to change your
yeah, if
viewing.
you're not seeing a refresh, you can do what
Right.
Sandy
So
said,
I would
right?
argue, yes, according to Salesforce, don't enable this feature because it's only used for, should I share? Is that all right?
No, we're about out of time. Let's I hear what you're saying.
So I want to
But
ask
that
a
is
question about how you set up the button though.
sure.
Um, to get back to the original topic. So we have a lot of times I've never actually set up the passing in the ID from the URL that way.
Okay, you probably use the standard where you get the naming convention of the record ID, and that's going to work on your actions and things like that.
No, I've got one where we have it a flow and it actually has a link to the flow itself. So what kind of button did you did a URL button, so not a flow
Yeah.
button? Okay.
Yeah. So, and here you can do it with the flow button. This is the first one I did that kept reloading.
Hmm.
The problem is, I think with the flow button, um, that's what you're running into. If you
Okay.
do it with the flow button, when you come here and you go to edit and you set it up, you don't get to then do the path. So
Right.
you'll get the same functionality, but you can then pass in your variables and you can
Right.
pass in the extra things like the ret URL. If
Okay.
instead of using the flow button,
Okay.
use the one that says URL. Yeah, good
Okay.
good
Yeah.
question. So yeah, that I'm
I
glad you
think we've
asked it.
usually, yeah, I think we've usually set it up as flow buttons as opposed to URL buttons. So that's
Yeah,
probably why
and
I remembered how to do that.
you see it appeared in the same place. It's just not
Hmm.
up at my top, so
Yeah.
it's down here. So just the same way that the flow button appears, you can get these to appear by using the URL. And so
Right.
I prefer the URL because it gives you that control. You can add extra stuff there.
Right.
And real quick, I know we're just about out of time. I just wanted to touch on if you're trying, say you wanted a screen flow that reacted and had your people do something because of a change on a record. So one thing we came up with just as a quick and dirty way is say when this checkbox was checked, that was what triggered your auto launched flow. So I checked the checkbox, save, and it triggered this screen flow right here above that runs just above on my page. And then when I do something with it,
So is that a screen flow that you have integrated into the page layout?
yeah, it's a screen flow. It's the same one that I've been using for all this
All right.
launching, but it's
Right.
embedded. And so because I checked that and hit save, now it popped up. I do whatever it wants me to do. I hit next.
And it
The
unchecks
last
it.
step in that flow is to uncheck that box and it goes away. So it kind of gives you that same functionality. Yeah, you're not getting a modal pop up or anything like that, but you are getting the flow to run for the user who's on the page at
Can
the
I say,
time that was checked.
And
Ryan,
so
can I
that
say that back to you? Go ahead, Sandy. Sorry.
saying you just basically use the visibility rules on the page layout.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Your
But
turn.
did you want to say that back to me?
Well, yeah, well, I wanted to say something back to you. So in theory, I could have a flow that effectively validates what's going on with a record and then checks a box which fires a screen flow.
Yeah, it doesn't exactly fire the screen flow, but it makes that screen flow visible on that record page.
Sorry, yeah, exposes.
So yes,
Exposes. Yeah.
it exposes it because all you do is use the simple visibility in it of, you know, is this situation true?
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
and then
Which
make
is,
sure that your flow undoes that situation as its last step. Like if we were
yeah.
to go
Yeah.
find that
Otherwise, you'd be in the loop
that
of having that on the screen forever. Yeah, that
where is it?
good catch.
This is the flow. It its final step is to
Uncheck
update the
the box.
text and then to
Nice.
also uncheck that box. So
Nice. So you're just
it's a cheap way to do what you're trying to do without having to install anything extra,
I
just
love it.
using out of the box features.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
It may not have quite the as flashy a UX, but I still don't think it's a very bad UX. It seemed like
I
a
was going to
decent
use the
UX
word
to me.
sexy there, but yes, that's exactly right. Yes. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
It'd be really
So
cool
yeah,
if you could put those screen flows like in that little the details section. That would be really nice.
yeah, I mean, you could drop it underneath where you have your details.
I know you can put it on a I just
But
meant
I
it'd be
know what
really
you're saying.
cool.
Yeah, if you could pop
Right.
it in there along with, yeah, that would be, and maybe we'll get there.
Maybe.
So we are we taken up to the wall. We showed one on a show. If Ken, you remember where to go find that setting off the top of your head, I can show that real quick.
Yeah, give me a second.
It's in session settings.
Session settings, and it's one of the best pages in Salesforce that scrolls to the
It
bottom of
is.
the page every time you reload it. I reported the bug, and it's a feature apparently of Salesforce. Right there at the bottom, caching 1, 2, 3, 4 sections down. So according to Salesforce, unchecking that should only be done in developer orgs because it'll slow down your org significantly. If anyone can tell me in milliseconds if they've noticed any difference whatsoever by unchecking that, I mean, maybe if you have 80,000 Salesforce users, there's an impact. I cannot have any discernible difference whatsoever.
It's
All it
not
does,
really users, it's how many records you have. So if you've got an org that has a lot of records, and do work in several, it's definitely not advisable.
right. So they advise against it. I mean, I would argue if you don't have a noticeable impact and your users aren't complaining, it's going to make your life a hell of a lot easier. But definitely in your sandbox or wherever you're testing.
Yeah, in your sandbox is fine, but there's really no need to really have it in your production org, and you probably really shouldn't have it in your production org just because of that whole improving performance thing.
Right.
All right. Yeah. So we were able to squeeze that in for you. Let
All right.
me stop the
Wonderful.
share. Hopefully we all got something out of today's session. I know we weren't able to really dive into the off-platform product there. None of us had the Zapier experience, but we, got to see what Zapier looks like. And
They do have a lot of learning resources. It's just that unfortunately they're a little bit more generic. So sometimes when you're trying to get down to that specific stuff, that's where it ends up being like, but I want to know this.
well, you're going to get that experience, and then you'll be able to share that with someone in the future who needs
Absolutely.
it. So when someone else comes on the call, you'll be the one who can say, actually,
I got it.
I do.
Got it. Pick me, pick me.
So very cool.
Cool. All right.
Oh.
Have a wonderful weekend, everyone.
Thanks,
All right.
everyone.
We'll see you guys next
Everybody.
week.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.